The 2023 Baseball Hall of Fame class has been announced. Obviously, we knew Fred McGriff was going to be inducted. However, we have one more inductee from the Baseball Writers ballot, and that is Scott Rolen. He got in by 5 votes. There are a couple other guys who were close. Todd Helton was close. Billy Wagner had about 68% of the votes. We got a lot to break down here. We're going to try and get into it. Talk Rolen, obviously. We'll cover some other guys too. Let's get straight into it. You're watching Bleacher Brawls. My name is Derek. I'm here with John, and let's get straight into it. First, obviously, congratulations to Scott Rolen. I think that's fair. He's a Hall of Famer, his 6th time on the ballot. Good for him. I'll throw it to John. Thoughts on Scott Rolen becoming a Hall of Famer?
All right, Derek, I'm going to give you my thoughts on Scott Rolen, but I need 1 minute really quick. John, for the first time ever, I lost a fantasy football league, came in dead last. It's never happened before, and of course it happens in this league, and now I have to deal with the punishment. Now, I'd like to just point out I lost to the accidental champion being Luke. This guy stumbled and bumbled his way through the season, backed into the playoffs with the last playoff spot. I beat him 2 weeks before the playoffs, so before he talks trash and that I'm so horrible, I beat him 2 weeks going into the playoffs, and this guy had no clue what was going on all season. Derek, give me a thumbs up if I'm telling the truth and a thumbs down if I'm lying. Every week, me and Derek were recording YouTube videos where before or after we recorded, we'd sit here and talk fantasy football, talk about players that we did have, didn't have, who was hot, who's not hot. Me and Derek were both locked in to fantasy football this year, or just football in general, and both of our teams had horrible luck. But that's okay. I also like to admit, full 100%, I mismanaged my team and made some dumb mistakes, so take nothing away from myself and my own stupidity. That being said, Luke was the accidental champion. This guy had no clue who Amon-Ra St. Brown was. I believe it's pronounced Amon-Ra St. Brown, but as an Egyptian history buff, I know Amon-Ra is the Egyptian sun god, so we're going to go Amon-Ra St. Brown, just very important for the pronunciation for me. No clue who this guy was at the beginning of the season. And we'll stick on the Lions. Like when the Patriots beat the Lions early in the season and then the Giants lost the Lions a few weeks later, and Luke had no clue the Lions have been turning around. He didn't know who Coach Campbell was and what he's doing to change that culture. Something Cassim and I have both talked about what a great job he's doing there. And the Lions fans truly think that this guy is really changing the culture. Patriots beat up on the Lions when they did not have St. Brown went down in the first quarter. DeAndre Swift didn't play that game. Luke's response was like, oh, just because they lose their 2 best players, they're going to lose to the Patriots? Like, yeah, like that's happens. Like you lose your 2 best players, the best defensive coach in football history is going to find a way to beat you. Like he had no clue that this team was getting good. Like he had 2 weeks. I beat Luke 2 weeks before the fantasy football playoffs started. He's like, who's this Brandon Ayuk guy? I'm like, his name's Brandon Ayuk. He's one of the weapons on one of the best teams in football. 49ers in an NFC championship game. You don't even know who this guy is. And you still accidentally somehow managed to win the fantasy football playoffs. This week, going in, and you can listen to it. It's on our podcast. He's trying to talk trash about the Giants for being the 3rd best team in their division. Like that was something, it wasn't even a real, like all Giants fans recognize they were the 3rd best team in their division, but there's the best division in football. They were the 4th best team in the NFC overall. Like I would say they had a pretty good season considering most people expected that team to be a 4 or 5 win team. Luke doesn't know any of this. He's the accidental champion. So now my fantasy football punishment is I have to hold up a sign or something. I said anything within reason, Luke. Fine. You make the punishment anything within reason. And the plan is to put up a sign of something that I would not like, and it has to be displayed. Now, this was supposed to start in our 30 teams in 30 days series, was when this was supposed to go down, but Luke insisted it had to happen today. Also, I'd like to point out, Luke, I mentioned in the group chat that I needed a whiteboard or something because I didn't have anything to put any of this on. You didn't get it to me. You wanted to stumble and bumble your way through this punishment like you did for the fantasy football season. So over there on that air conditioner, 12 feet away from me, because I have no other place to put this up, is your sign. But I'll be a nice guy and actually read what it says. Luke decided to say Javier Vasquez and Aaron Judge are the biggest Yankees playoff chokers of all time. And I would like to say that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, to think that you are insulting Yankees fans by talking about Javier Vasquez. No Yankees fan cares about Javier Vasquez at all. He's not even a thought. And for you to be what you write, to think you're insulting me, bro, like, come on, man. You got to know better than that. Barnes and Cassim, if you guys end up being part of this punishment, take that as a personal insult from Luke that he thought you cared about Javier Vasquez. You put up whatever you want to say and take your shots at Luke, whatever you need to do. This whole thing was an absolute just joke. I can't believe this is the guy that won, and you're trying to talk trash about Javier Vasquez. I don't know, bro. It's a mess. So there's your thing, your sign. You're more than welcome to come down here this weekend and help me figure out something better, but you gave me no time today because you broke it on me today that this had to start today when I thought it was starting weeks from now. I'm done with my rant. It's over. There's your sign. You should have thought this through a little bit better. You're my friend, but come on, dude. Terrible, terrible, terrible decision. Now, and just I'd like to point out, this guy has just unbelievable luck. Past 20 years, I've seen Luke's luck. Just, it's unbelievable lucky this guy's had. Still considers himself an underdog. And
he's got a target on his back next year.
What was that?
He's got a target on his back next year.
Target on his back. Let's beat Luke next year. So, rant over. Let's talk about Scott Rolen. Look, I watched Scott Rolen play. He was during my time, like the time I remember Scott Rolen coming up to the Phillies, then moving to the Cardinals is really, I think, where his Hall of Fame career, like he was good with the Phillies, Hall of Fame career really blossomed in St. Louis. Scott Rolen was the best defensive third baseman of his time and probably the best hitting third baseman of his time. Unquestionably, Hall of Famer. You knew it when you were watching him play. You knew this guy was going to end up in the Hall of Fame one day. Just a ton of congratulations to him. It's well deserved. Derrik, I've talked for a while, so why don't you go in and I'll get back to Scott Rolen.
Yeah, I think Scott Rolen's deserving. Obviously, great two-way guy, in terms of, offense at the plate, defense at third base. I made this comparison a couple days ago, talking to a couple people off camera, and I said Scott Rolen is like Nolan Arenado if Arenado was underappreciated. I feel like, maybe Arenado ends up having a better career long-term, maybe, I don't know. But I feel like people were sleeping on Scott Rolen, especially because when he first entered the ballot, it was like, okay, yeah, he played defense, but his offensive numbers aren't elite like other third basemen. They're not that like elite. But when you start to factor in how good he was defensively and all that, and you combine, still very good offense, I feel like it just makes sense. He's a Hall of Famer. He has the lowest percentage of votes on his first ballot to then becoming a Hall of Famer. I think his first ballot he got like 10 point something percent of the votes. Didn't even get 11%, and now he becomes a Hall of Famer. Gets over the 75% clip. He only got it by 5 votes though, so it definitely was close. But I think he's definitely deserving of it, and I think him being a Hall of Famer just makes sense.
Definitely. And I mean, I'm looking at his stats right now. It's still 280 lifetime average, 316 home runs, 2,000 hits, and 1,200 RBIs. The guy, he again, he wasn't the best hitter of his generation, but he was a really good hitter and played a part in quite a few of those Cardinals teams. I believe he would have won a World Series in 2006.
Six, yeah, 06.
Yeah, so I mean, World Series winner on top of it. And he was a big part of that. It looks like his 2004 season, 34 home runs, 314 average. I mean, the guy played. I always considered him a Hall of Famer. When you're watching him play, you're like, this guy's getting up in the Hall of Fame one day. And it kind of surprises me it took as long as it did for him to make it into the Hall of Fame. But I'm glad he finally made it in. He certainly deserved it.
Yeah, and I also think too, we're getting some of the younger writers and younger voters coming in to vote for the Hall of Fame, and it's helping a lot of guys like Scott Rolen. It's going to help Todd Helton. It's definitely been helping Billy Wagner. His first 2 years on the ballot, he had 10.5% and 10.2%, and now this year he got, I think, 68%. So I think there's definitely a wave of guys who are they're not just closing the Hall of Fame off to the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. They're still letting in guys who are some of the best players still that we've ever seen. I'd say Scott Rolen is still one of the best players we've ever seen, especially at third base. He's definitely up there. So I think it's fair that he's in the Hall of Fame, and I think it makes sense. But I do want to move on to another guy who was close with Rolen percentage wise on votes on the public votes before the voting was announced, before the results were announced tonight. Todd Helton just missed out on the Hall of Fame. It was definitely close. I think he was at 72%. I can fact check that though. But he just missed out. But you would think he becomes almost a lock next year. At least you would think so.
Yeah, I believe it was about 11 votes short, if I'm correct. I would think Todd Helton absolutely belongs in the Hall of Fame. He's an all-time Rocky. And, I guess probably some voters are holding it against him because he played so many years in Colorado, and they probably think that inflates his numbers. But at the same time, I mean, it's not like he was protected in that lineup. I mean, it was pretty easy to pitch around the guy if you needed to. So he was out there getting hits without any protection in the lineup. I think that says something for him to put up the career stats that he did, and even the year by year stats that he did. It just in a team that really wasn't that good, and he wasn't like there was really no other threats there. And if pitchers didn't want to really have to pitch to him, they could just throw him junk all day. And part of that being, I mean, he still got his hits, he still got his home runs. He was a really good player for a long time, great athlete too. I
Yeah.
believe he actually had a scholarship to play college football, but ended up going the baseball route, which I would have too.
Yeah, I think with Helton, you also look at it like he means a lot to that Rockies franchise. But also too, like just a really, really good hitter, walked more than struck out in his career. And people can say the Coors factor, but I go back to this with Coors. For most guys, it's not like a home runs paradise. It becomes a doubles, or if you're a little bit speedier, a triples paradise instead of being a home runs paradise because it's so deep in the gaps. Um, some guys who pull the ball kind of down the line or whatever, yeah, maybe it's a little bit more home run friendly for them. But it's not, this crazy home run park. Also, too, he played pretty much every single day, every single year of his career for the most part. And doing that at high altitude for half your games, I think that also should, you know, that should mean something because how many guys go to Coors high altitude and it's like, nope, we're going to give that guy an off day.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I've been to Denver a couple times, and I like to exercise, work out, run, whatever. That's a hard place to work out. I mean, you even see it NFL too. Like some of the best conditioned athletes in the country go to Denver and struggle when they play there. And so that's a fantastic point, Derek. And I was actually looking at something. Todd Helton's, we were talking about him not really being protected in the lineup. In the year 2000, 216 hits, 59 doubles, 42 home runs, 147 RBIs, 372 average, and then 463 on base, 698 slugging, 1.162 OPS. But all in all, 216 hits, 59 doubles, 42 home runs, 147 RBIs, 372 average. And we want to talk about not being protected in that lineup. Larry Walker played in 87 games for 372 plate appearances. Walker, and that without question, by far, there's nobody else on that team that scares you. Look in that lineup: Brett Maine, Mike Lansing, Nefi Perez, Jeff Starillo, Tom Goodwin, Jeffrey Hammonds, Terry Shumpert, young Juan Pierre. So really, before he got good in Miami a few years later, Todd Hollingsworth, whose career was over at that point. I mean, there is nobody in that lineup that scares you. And Helton raked all season long. And I mean, that was just his best season. He had some really, really other good seasons on top of that. Multiple 200 hit seasons. Another year was 197 hits. Multiple years, look at these averages. Starting at age 24, first full season, 315, 320, 372, 336, 329, 358, 347, 320, 302, 320 again in 2007. So that's a stretch of age 24 to age 33 where you're hitting the high 300s every year. Just an amazing hitter. It'd be a shame if he doesn't make the Hall of Fame next season.
I think because we've seen guys take jumps year to year, I think it makes sense that Helton will get in. But another guy I'm interested in is Billy Wagner because he had 68% of the vote. Logically, if he takes the same jump he took this year, he will get in next year. Really, the only surefire on next year's ballot is Adrian Beltre. So you're looking at Billy Wagner going, he might have a shot too. arguably the best left-handed reliever that we've ever seen, arguably. And the thing about Billy Wagner is, there is some reluctancy by voters to vote in relief pitchers because they're relievers. They didn't have the same workload as starters or whatever. And it's like, at the end of the day, how I look at it, it's like, if you're elite at your position and your position's a relief pitcher, I mean, not Billy Wagner wasn't just elite; he was like one of the best, if like ever, relief pitchers. You should get in. Like you can make the argument if he played for like a big market team his whole career, he'd easily be in. And even his last year in the big leagues, he arguably had his best year. He had a 1.43 ERA in his last year with in 71 appearances and 69 innings. So he could have kept on going.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it. To be that good at 38 years old, it says something. I mean, Billy Wagner had a really good career. And I think you're right. I think he does get hurt because he played for Houston, when they were in the National League, when they weren't a good team. And that's really, I think that really kills him because that's where he started his career. And he played till he was 31, ends up in Philly for a couple of years. I know he was in the Mets, and that's where a lot of careers go to die. But for what it's worth, he wasn't bad with the Mets. I mean, that says a lot for a Wilpon era Mets, for the Wilpon era Mets, for someone, a free agent to go to the Mets when the Wilpons owned that team. Whole different story under Steve Cohen. But when the Wilpons owned that team, if a free agent went to the Mets, his career was over. Billy Wagner is one of the few exceptions where that did not happen. I think that says a lot to the overall talent of the guy.
Yeah, like I said, just like one of the best relievers we've ever seen, probably the best left-handed reliever we've ever seen, or at least one of the top three, probably. Yeah, it probably deserves it, especially too. I think like I said, the more younger voters we get in, the more willing they're going to be to vote in relief pitchers. So I think if you're going to vote in relief pitchers, Billy Wagner has to be top of that list. I do want to talk about some other guys though. If we can each name two guys. Let's name two guys. Go one at a time. Let's start with this. Who do you think is going to take the biggest jump next year in terms of voting? Notable names: Andrew Jones, Carlos Beltran, A-Rod, Manny Ramirez. You could go down the list more, but who do you think kind of makes that jump next year?
Man, that's a tough question because I mean, Helton only needs a couple more votes. We've already talked about Billy Wagner, so I'm going to exclude him because I do think he's close enough where he's going to make it next year. So looking at Jones, maybe Beltran. I think Beltran got penalized his first year on the ballot because of the whole Astros cheating scandal, which, hey, whatever, Beltran, that's your own fault. I like you, Beltran, but that's your own fault. I think Beltran would probably have a pretty good jump because he's at 46%, 46.5%. And Beltran's another guy. When you watched him play, you knew he was a Hall of Famer. Especially early in his career, when he was just such a good fielder in center field. I mean, just running down balls, making catches, like jumping catches at the wall, and then just being a dominant bat. I think if people move on from the Astros cheating scandal, which I personally haven't, but maybe other people are bigger people than me. If they can do that, I'd say Beltran probably my guess would be Beltran would have the biggest jump.
Yeah, I know some voters have said like they'll vote for that didn't vote for him this year will say, yeah, I'll vote for him next year. He just because the Astros shooting scandal wasn't deserving of being a first ballot guy, which is fair, but that makes me think he might have a sizable jump. But someone I am looking at a sizable jump maybe is going to be Andrew Jones. You just saw a guy who is very good defensively and Rolen get in, and now you're looking at Andrew Jones. Maybe he gets in. Definitely a case to be made there. Now, does he get in? Does he not? Who knows? Next year, but I think Andrew Jones will get in at some point, whether it's on the writers' ballot, on some other ballot. I think Andrew Jones just gets in. Now, yes, people like there are some writers who are like, well, he fell off when he started falling off a cliff when he was 30, and that's too early to fall off a cliff. But it's like, okay, but the guy also debuted when he was 19 years old, so he gave you a solid like 10, 11 years before he fell off a cliff. So it's like that debate of like, yeah, he fell off a cliff early in terms of age, but he still gave you, he should have probably arguably gave you more than enough years. I think it was his 2005 year where he was just like outrageous, 56 homers, like 120 RBIs, something like that. And stellar defense in center field, arguably the best defensive outfielder we've seen, or at least definitely up there though.
Yeah, I mean, again, another guy that's really definitely deserving the consideration. I think because of the way baseball writers are, you mentioned him getting in on the Veterans Committee. I think that's going to be his route. Because I think like it's going to be helpful. Baseball writers are going to hold it against him that he fell off a cliff despite having a amazing 18 to 30-year-old season. He fell off a cliff after, and baseball writers will hold that against him. I think when it gets to, like you said, the Veterans Committee, when you're looking at former players, former managers, former executives who really see the game differently, I think they'll recognize his talent then. And I would guess that would be his route in, much like Fred McGriff this year.
But yeah, let's wrap this thing up. Any final thoughts on the Hall of Fame ballot?
So I do. Okay, so final thoughts on the Hall of Fame ballot. I love this time of year. I love the Hall of Fame. Again, like I think A-Rod, I got to mention A-Rod. It's his own. Like he's the first guy to admit it's his own fault if he doesn't make it into the Hall of Fame. That being said, I think A-Rod, the retired player, is a lot more likable than A-Rod when he was playing. So he might be doing himself some favors right now, being doing like Fox games or FS1 games, whatever, with David Ortiz and the rapport they have between each other. I think he's making himself more likable. So maybe he doesn't get in with the writers because writers hold grudges and stupid stuff like that, which we already addressed with Gary Sheffield. But maybe there's a day when A-Rod makes it in. And if he does, good for him, because again, drove me crazy as a player, but he's much more likable as a former player. And last thing, because Luke, I said I'd do it. Here you go, all the way back here, because I had no place to hang anything, Luke, and you knew that. Here's your little sign written in crayon, because that's what you get for talking about Javier Vasquez. Like, it deserves to be written in crayon. So one more time, Luke, there's your little thing, your little sign. It was a terrible idea. And unless you plan on coming and helping me, all those signs are going to be back all the way back there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think overall this Hall of Fame ballot, they got Rolen right. I think Helton will get in. I think Wagner will get in. So they're trending in the right direction. I think Manny and A-Rod find themselves in a similar spot. Both, PED guys. Numbers alone more than good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. But it just, and I think, and like we saw it with Bonds and Clemens and on the Veterans Committee, it just like they got no support. So it feels like for A-Rod and like if A-Rod and Manny, like if they don't get in now on the writers ballot on their time there, it'll be a long time until they get in.
Yeah, I think you'll really need more and more of their contemporaries on that Veterans Committee, because I think if you face those guys, especially Maynard Maynard, is just much like Gary Sheffield, just a terrifying hitter to face. You couldn't throw anything past him. I think if you were a contemporary of those guys, you would recognize that talent and be like, look, man, steroids or not, these guys were freaking amazing. So
Yeah.
I think that's what they'll have going for. But again, it has to really be more their era guys as opposed to guys from years before them that are.
Yeah. Yeah, and also too, it's like the whole like that committee. There's only 16 people on it, so they can kind of huddle. Like, let's all vote for this guy and not for these. That can happen too. So yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap it up, though. Great punishment idea, Luke. Great one on that. Great idea. And if you wanted it better executed, you could have taken it into your own hands. But yeah, make sure to check out all our Bleacher Brawls links in the description, the Bleacher Brawls website, podcast, Instagram, and Twitter, plus all the crew's Twitters. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to get notified so you get notified whenever we post. And yeah, that's it. For John, my name is Derek. Thanks for tuning in to Bleacher Brawls, and we'll see you next time.